Welcome to Seed to Success, the podcast where we deep dive into the strategies, stories, and smart decisions that help VAs and OBMs grow and thrive. I'm your host, Adrienne Donnelly, and whether you're just starting out or looking for ways to take your business to the next level, you're in the right place. This episode is proudly sponsored by Ready to Boss Legal. Their online legal templates focus on the ins and outs of protecting your business legally without fuss or large legal fees, leaving you to focus on what you do best, being the boss and building the business of your dreams. As a listener of the podcast, you will receive 10% off any templates through Ready to Boss Legal. Just use SEED10 upon checkout. That is SEED10 for a 10% discount at readytobosslegal.com. Now let's get into today's conversation.
So today we are joined by a very special guest and a long-term friend of Seed Virtual Assistants, Emma from Ready to Boss Legal. So welcome to you, Emma.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I wanted to dive straight in to get into, I guess, the basics. In your opinion, for the VAs and OBMs that are getting started, now our listeners and viewers will be people that are just getting started or are well established. In your opinion, what are the fundamental legal documents and, documents, I think, and processes that they should have in place in their business?
I think the first thing they should do, apart from, registering their business and getting their ABN, and if they can only afford one thing at first, then that would be the client service agreement. And that's what they give to clients to engage them. And they might not have a website yet, which is fine. But, the next thing after that would be, okay, let's get the website going to establish that credibility and presence. And with the website, you should have some website documents with that. And there's actually, I always used to say two, but there's actually a third one in the last little while that I've been recommending with the privacy policy and website terms of use to sit along the bottom of your website. And that's an AI use policy.
Mm-hmm.
So we call those documents website bundles. So you've got website terms of use, which when you look, people often have that in the footer with a click about using the website. The privacy policy often sits below next to that. And then an AI use policy, can sit beside those two. And I think it needs to be separate because we recently updated our privacy policy and website terms of use and put in some AI use, but it's gone even further than that now in terms of, businesses want to know how people are using AI and when they would. And if you think about a client coming in to work with a VA, they're going to want to know how and when they use it and that there will be human oversight. So I think that's there, those website documents are important. So they'd be the next thing in that order. And then in the future, as you grow and you start using other people, the future document would be the subcontractor agreement. Okay. And I think they're the key things to think about depending at what stage people are at.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's go to the client service agreement. Sometimes we call them client agreements, service agreements, those sorts of things. What do you see typically that are included in those documents, and maybe even some of the things that you often see aren't and that should be?
Yeah, and we also call those terms and conditions. So you will often hear those two terms you mentioned and terms and conditions used interchangeably.
Yes.
But it's basically the same thing. And that's the conditions about working your agreement between a VA and a client. So what we want it to include is, what it's like working with you, but also getting paid on time, avoiding misunderstandings, client expectations, protecting intellectual property, so copyright, trademarks, and what happens, a termination clause, so how to end it if things aren't working. And so that's what we need to look at. And it's also really important about scope. So what are you going to do for someone in terms of work, what does it include and what's actually excluded. Often
Mm.
people don't put in exclusions, and there's that misunderstanding about what you will be doing for your client. They think you're doing 3 things when you think you're only doing 1 thing, or they think that, if you're organizing a conference for them, they think that all of a sudden you're going to be there on the day to help, but really you're just planning it. You need to make sure you put in your exclusion was, I'm not going to be there. That's, I suppose, an example of that.
And in terms of your business, and if someone's listening and they're thinking, okay, I may not have some of these things, or maybe my template, I found it online. And often when we're starting our businesses, there are a lot of expenses, and sometimes we are looking for free resources in our business. Can you tell us a little bit how Ready to Boss Legal supports VAs and OBMs in this kind of legal documentation space?
Sure. We've got a template, which is sort of, it's a middle ground. And I was running a legal practice, and then there were lots of VAs who couldn't afford the full service. But they, had a real common ground in terms of what they needed. So on the back of that, we developed these templates to be that middle ground. They're not a free ChatGPT drafted thing. They're not a free template from America. They're Australian drafted documents that cover all these things, including the use of AI and access to client systems and disputes and things. So that's what we offer. We offer that. And it's in your bundle as well, your startup bundle. So there's not only the value that document brings, but all the templates that a practicing VA provides them alongside that. So that's, I think, a really valuable thing. And separately, those things aren't as valuable as they are together.
Yeah. And that's a great point for people that are listening that are thinking, I need to get some of these templates, and where do I go? Or, maybe things I'm finding aren't really specific for our industry. It's worth noting that any members of the Seed community, whether you're in the inner circle or not, do receive some very generous discounts for your business, which we'll make sure are in the show notes. And I would say, there's been hundreds of people that have come through your business to get those sorts of templates. You mentioned, overseas templates or templates that are developed, and it made me think, with some VAs that are supporting clients outside of our country, so that are maybe have clients overseas and are not working with clients in Australia, or maybe have a mix of Australian and international clients, are there certain things they should be looking out for? Are those templates still covering, both the VA and their client?
They are, and you can use your VA agreement, and there's a few things to look at. The first one would be the governing law, or what we call jurisdiction.
Mhm.
And some people might think, oh, well, I'm working with a client in America, I'm going to put America. You don't do that. You do that. A governing law is the law, if you have a dispute, which courts you would go to sort it out. So you don't want to put California and you're traveling to California to sort out your VA contract. You want to put, Queensland or New South Wales or wherever you live in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the contract is made, because that's where you are. So that stays there. And that's a really important thing to put in, because if there's a dispute, that's the laws we use to resolve it. And we've seen contracts with Australia, which is not, it just doesn't work, because we have all these states and territories with different laws and different courts. And you're not going to go to the High Court or the Federal Court to resolve your payment dispute. So that can be used. Just make sure you put that in there. You also need to look at currency and payment terms. How are you getting paid? Is it Australian dollars? Is it US? Is it pounds? That's going to be really important, and can be others, but you need to then work out, is there a tax issue? What's going on with GST if you are registered to charge it? That's all important to look after. And then I suppose data protection as well. Which privacy laws apply? And in the UK and Europe, there is something called the GDPR, which is much more, I suppose, much stricter. It's similar to our Privacy Act, but it's much stricter. There's much stricter requirements. So you need to think about, well, actually, I might need a privacy policy that's compliant with that. So these are all things to think about. And I think the main thing too is if there's a dispute with someone overseas and they owe you money, you can sue them. You've got the contract, but are you actually going to be able to get the same sort of orders against a client you would in Australia?
Okay. You've mentioned disputes there a few
Mm.
times. Let's talk about that. And I think it's important to mention that this isn't a common occurrence that's happening. I mean, I've had my VA business for 10 years and
Yeah.
I've never, and, knock wood, maybe it's just lovely clients or, just the type
Yeah.
of people, but I've never had to pull out an agreement and say to the client, look, this is in the agreement, but I do understand that this can happen from time to time, especially in terms of payment. What do you see as the role of that contract or that client service agreement when things, I guess the most common one would be a client not paying? How does that document play a role in those sorts of situations that may come up between us and our clients?
So I think it's actually, it's really the start of prevention
Hmm.
rather than a problem. So it's like putting sunscreen on before you go out in the sun to stop yourself getting a payment problem. So I think
Yes.
that's the first thing. And it also, it shows your client you're on the same page. If they see that and they say, I'm not signing that, or I've got a problem with some of your terms, then that's actually a really good red flag to come up with first.
Mm.
And I think when you get really good referrals, that means that 95% of people you won't ever have a problem with. It will be great. But this document may flush out some of those problems before they start. And the other thing it can do is it makes you think really clearly about how do I charge? Do I charge an hourly rate? Do I charge monthly in advance? Do I actually need prepayment? And if you said, well, you pay me by the month, let's pay me on the first of the month and then I'll do the work. That means that you wouldn't start the work until you were paid. So you would never have a payment problem with that. And some clients might think, no, I want you to do the work. Let's do that. But you could set it up, paid weekly, fortnightly, monthly, have in there some provisions that allow you to pause work if you're not paid.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not, instead of if there's a dispute, it's 1 month pay you're chasing, not
Mm.
or the contract or the service agreement actually just helps you do that. And that manages, it from probably even becoming a dispute most of the time. But if it does, then you've got a contract to stand up.
Yeah, I think that prevention point that you made is so important. We talk a lot in the community, especially in the inner circle and with people coming in and starting their VA or OBM businesses about, I guess, starting how you intend the relationship to go and the importance of language and establishing yourself as a business owner in your own right. And I think that sort of talks to your point as well, as if that is how you start the relationship, here are our expectations of each other. Here's what I'm going to do for you, the client, and here's what I expect in return. Then everyone's on the same page. The clients are taking you seriously as a business owner in your own right because you've got a very smooth and set out onboarding process. And those legal documents, I remember a lawyer saying to me once, if clients push back, it's about selling it to them that this is for us to both protect each other. It's not just about the VA getting everything that they need, but it's also about your clients being protected as well. And I think by having those professional documents in place really sets the tone for that relationship from the jump.
It absolutely does. And it talks about confidentiality and what they can expect from you as well. It is a really mutual document. So that's the thing. You sort of got to sell it to them as well. This is our engagement. It protects you as well as me because you might decide you're going to hire a full-time employee as an assistant and we need to stop working together. because the business has grown so much, or you might decide to sell your business. And, there's all these things that could happen on both sides. And this is, like you said, it establishes that professional relationship and a supplier who you pay. And I think without a document, they can probably get away with a bit more, and you don't know if they're going to push back. It does actually show their true colours up front. Maybe, and it's really hard when you're getting your first clients. You really want to get your foot in the door, and you probably need some money to get going. But if someone is arguing over your hourly rate or their payment, they want to pay you every 3 months, or, they, to me, are really big red flags.
Yes, I would agree. It's you've segued perfectly into something I wanted to ask you. One of the questions that we get most in the VA and OBM space is, how are people finding their clients? And for a lot of us, they are people that are known to us. One of the most common answers that I see when people ask is they were past colleagues, people I've worked with before, family and friends. So when there is that already perhaps a personal relationship that already exists between you and your clients, do you have any tips around navigating those contract conversations or those service agreement conversations, when often it can be quite a casual sort of engagement, and that some VAs or OBMs might feel like they're shying away from some of that more formal business process because they're talking with mates or colleagues, family and friends?
I think in that case, it's actually even more important to have the conversation, because you almost want to create a new, you almost want to have two types of relationships with this person.
Totally agree.
And my bookkeeper, actually, our sons go to school together, and I knew her before I engaged her as my bookkeeper. So when she sent me her client engagement, I was really pleased about that. And and I make sure I pay my bills on time. But that sets that relationship, and that's very different to the relationship you have as a friend, or someone, who your children are friends. So I think that I really appreciated that. And I think that's, if you sort of think about as a business owner, with a bookkeeper, similar kind of freelance work to a freelance type contractor engagement to a VA. So I appreciated that as a business owner. And I think your family, your friend, your colleague, they're going to appreciate that. Okay, this is our work relationship. This is our social relationship outside of work. So I think you just need to say, well, this is my process. And I would just set a standard operating procedure and explain that this is what I do when I take on a new client. So we're clear on what the scope is, the hours, the rate, to focus on that. And then if it changes, you can change that, but it sets the tone for that relationship.
I like that you said, it's almost like that relationship then has two arms. You're putting the friend hat or the mum at the school gate hat on, but then there's also that other hat that you're wearing where now we're talking to each other, not as sister-in-laws or, two people on the same basketball team, but we're talking as two business owners to each other. We talked a few times about the scope that we put in our client agreement. And I know we have scenarios in our inner circle membership where people will say, how are people navigating, asking other VAs and OBMs for advice, how are we navigating changes in scope, and not in the client's asking me more and they don't want to pay me, but we have both agreed we're going to change the scope. How did those sorts of changes, and I mean, I've seen it in my own business over the years as clients' businesses have grown or different, economic situations have arisen, that, we do need to be flexible and change our scope. And I made that decision to either, to dial up or down my hours. How does that then play out into our client service agreements? Do they need to be updated every time? Is it a supporting email that says we both agree? What's your kind of advice around that?
So I think if it's hugely different, like you're completely changing scope and your structure, then a new service agreement would be a great way. if it's, changing hours or you're adding or removing tasks, then I think a supporting email or a cover letter that you send by email and get there saying, yes, I agree, this will start from X date. And then keeping copies of all of that with your original service agreement in a file is the best way. As long as it's not some completely so if they'd sold their business and it was with the new business owner, then yes, you would do a new service agreement. But if it's, a small change and then you both on page, just keep everything together in and probably electronic files. I don't think many people would keep the paper files now, but if you keep paper files, keep it in paper files, but make sure it's all together because you want to be able to find that. If they get your invoice and they say, why do you charge me an extra $200 this month? Then you can at least just grab that email and say, well, actually, our new arrangement started this month.
Okay.
So, yeah, you don't need to reinvent the wheel
Yeah.
if it's not, a new car, basically.
Yeah. So significant changes, quite drastic changes to scope of work or services delivered, we would reissue. Smaller changes. So one of the examples that we had was someone was helping a client with social media. The agreement was that they would post to two platforms. So let's call it Instagram and TikTok. And the client was saying, I think I might like to start looking at you helping me with my LinkedIn. So already part of the same service, but just adding on another area to post. So that could potentially be one of those, client agreement is in place, but we add a supporting email that we both agreed. But if that person was doing social media and then the client said, I'd also like you to now start managing, my customer service, managing my client appointments and bookings. So almost like a new service area. Would that be significant enough to then reissue?
I think it would probably be a good idea
Mm,
because that's going to be a significant probably change to hours and price.
mm,
And possibly even at that point, if they're doing that many things, it might not just be them doing it as a sole trader, but they've got
mm,
subcontractors and the permission for the subcontractors to come in and do it because that creates other confidentiality issues.
Yeah, that's a really good point in terms of making sure our agreements are not just covering us, but then also anyone in our teams that may be, supporting us to deliver that work. In terms of, your work and supporting our industry, as well as many other industries in terms of the resources that you provide, when VAs and OBMs are coming to you, do you get a sense of certain trends around questions or advice or common sorts of things that people in our industry are reaching out and asking you about?
Yeah, probably in the last 12 months, the most common questions have been around AI
Mm-hmm.
use and also superannuation is a
Mm,
big,
the S
tricky
word.
question, which is, really tricky to navigate. I think the law is clear. It's just actually takes a bit of finesse to navigate it with clients.
Mm.
Um, and people's thinking of what contractors and employees are like compared to, the law around that and changing things.
Mm. And so at your business, if people are coming to you for that sort of advice, how would you support them? Is that something that you do? Is it something that you would refer them to? Would you give them the templates and then say, look, we'd recommend you talk to this? Or are you able to provide that advice as well?
So I provide general information. I do templates now. There are a couple of lawyers I work with and refer to. If, a VA had a dispute around, you know, payment and scope, actually, which is really rare because usually they're pretty, I think this was a rare thing that was, an issue, but I referred her to another lawyer who managed to solve it for her. But I do a lot of general information around super and that kind of thing. So I suppose my aim is legal education and information. So people are empowered to be able to do most things themselves, but there's always at a point where, you know, a lawyer's a really good idea. Like if you're sick, you go to the doctor. If there is a real issue, then getting legal advice is a good idea. But,
Mm.
on the whole, as long as you set up well and you've got really firm accounting structures as well, then, it's a good way to keep on the right track without necessarily having the big budget legal firms come
Yes.
in. Yeah, and that sort of, accounting as well as people start as sole traders and move to companies can be a real tricky time at
Mm.
that startup to, this is people use the word scale, but that looks really different to lots of people, what that looks like, whether
Mm.
it's a lifestyle business or they are wanting to build an empire. There's all probably most people sit in between, I think.
On any given day, we swing from one
Yeah.
to the other.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned at the top of the conversation about some of those other documents that you would recommend and that you're
Mhm.
providing templates for. Are there any other templates and documents that you see in our space that are popular, that you see a lot of people coming to your website for, or it's those sort of main key ones around the client interface, the client interaction, and then the website?
They are the main ones. I do actually get a lot of VAs reach out. They've used our templates for themselves, but then they'll be working for a client who needs certain things. So that will be a really key thing, and we often can just give some guidance about what they might need or if they actually need to go off to a lawyer. But we certainly have some specialist agreements as well in the VA space around NDIS
Hmm.
work, medical VAs, OBMs as well. If someone's gone from that, VA, and VA is such a broad tag, it's a bit like tradie.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, within that, there's things like social media management, admin, but then people go into, say, bookkeeping or online business management, where they're taking a more sort of strategic managerial role, managing other team members, and they move into more of the OBM space. And a lot of people are, they call themselves a VA, but they might be setting up Kajabi or Notion or Dubsado, just really, they're really knowledgeable in a tech platform. So the question often is, well, when do I need the OBM agreement? When do I
Mhm.
outgrow? And the VA agreement will work, forever. But with an OBM agreement, we do have some extra clauses in there around giving strategic advice to clients. There's a bit more protection of
Mm.
liability and things like if you're affiliated to, say, Dubsado or Kajabi and you give them codes, some more affiliate arrangements as well.
It's really interesting that kind of those contracts still also need to, it's not just the actual service delivery, but it also goes into some of those advice areas and affiliate areas. I think you might be reading my mind a bit because one of the questions I was thinking was often as VAs or OBMs, our clients will come to us and say, hey, would you mind doing some research? I need such and such. And I myself have had situations where a client is looking to update their website and they need, their web developer's gone, you don't have privacy or privacy policy,
Mm.
you don't have website terms and conditions. So it's so great to know for our listeners that are VAs and OBMs, but that they can also come to you for a whole range of industries and specialty areas to receive support, browse the templates. What are some of those other industries that you're supporting?
We actually have a lot of lawyer clients and law firms. So lawyers sometimes buy our templates to
Hmm.
adapt as a base for their clients because I've got really niche online course templates, online program. But also now with the, non-disclosure agreements, they're really
Hmm.
common as well. And something that VAs will come to us a bit for, especially if they start using subcontractors with their
Yes.
clients. The client will sometimes, because as their subcontractor and your client never have an agreement. The VA sort of has an agreement with each. It's like a triangle,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't meet at the bottom. So the VA is kind of in the middle here. And sometimes, especially if it's really confidential work, privacy and data, they will want to reassure the contractor that there's, there's some confidentiality in place between the subcontractor and the client because there's no other agreement between those two.
Yeah, that is it's sort of, I love that way you explained that, the triangle that doesn't have a bottom, because we obviously have client agreements and then we have agreements with our team members. And sometimes the two never meet. Our team may be working in the background and they're not in a client facing role. And again, it is just that thing around ensuring that everyone in the business is covered and protected.
And you don't necessarily want your subcontractor and your client to meet because that's a real risk of, they could go, this person's great, and they might do it for half the price. I'm just going to go with that subcontractor and cut you out.
Oh
So
gosh, I hope some of my team were directly with clients, so I hope that never happens. I'm sure it wouldn't.
That's why you have the subcontractor agreement and why
Correct.
you make sure you have the right people as your
Yes.
subcontractor.
Yes.
And mostly your subcontractors are quite specialist in areas and they're happy doing that work rather than the direct contact. But that is why that's important in the future if you are starting to build a team, to be really careful about, I suppose, who those people are, the skill set, the client interface, all of that kind of thing.
It's so important. Again, it just comes down to that prevention, right? And sticky situations are going to happen. We're all human beings interacting, having relationships in a business sense. It's about that protection of everybody to make sure that no one is exposed and none of our businesses are at risk, really.
And it's really about communication as well.
Yes.
Communication about why you need an agreement in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And also ongoing communication about, well, we're going to do this now and so-and-so is going to be working on that, and just making everyone feel comfortable rather than taking the work and someone secretly in a back room doing it and you spitting it out and, not knowing what's happening. So it really is about communicate. And, if you want to put your prices up or drop some hours, is communicating that with your client rather than resenting them or not saying anything and it becoming a problem.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway is definitely that aspect of prevention, for sure. Emma, before we wrap up, if there's VAs or OBMs that are listening, is there any specific advice or tips when it comes to, protecting themselves and their clients legally that you would like to leave our listeners and our viewers with?
So I think to think about probably the financials as well as sort of trademarks and things. So most VAs, I would say, are sole traders, but there might be a point when you think about becoming a company, if your business is growing or, you've got personal assets at risk or you're building a brand or business bigger than you that you might want to sell or wanting to split income with family members. At that point, you should go and get accounting advice to make sure that you're in the right structure for your tax bracket there. So I think that's really important. It's not just legal, it's also financial as well. And I suppose what I'd like to leave you with, knowing a bit more about intellectual property or what's in your brain.
Yeah,
In
let's unpack
terms
that a bit.
of,
Yeah.
I often hear copyright and trademark used interchangeably, which they are actually different. So intellectual property is like a broad term, or IP, and that's things like inventions, designs, brand names, and artistic work or blogs, even, website content blogs. In Australia, we sort of separate them into sort of patents, copyright, trademark, plant breeders' rights. But really for VAs, copyright and trademark are the two things relevant. So copyright is what you write. So anything you write on your website or publish, that's copyright. You should have a C with a circle. And you might have copyright on my templates, as do you. And if someone then takes it and uses it and tries to sell it, then that's a breach of copyright. And that comes into play straight away. Copyright, you don't need to pay to register. That is copyright. So you do need to protect that, especially with clients. If you draft standard operating procedures for them or they use your templates, you need to work out what they own and what you own. In terms of your service agreement, needs to be pretty clear on that. So, but then a trademark is more, someone copying your business name. You can go in and register at IP Australia for a trademark protection for like the name, the word or logo or slogan, and even sounds can be trademarked. So that is a process through IP Australia. And you see a TM next to something.
Yes.
That doesn't mean it's registered. I could use TM now against my name, but if I have a registered trademark, which I do for Ready to Boss Legal, it has a capital R and a circle, and that means it's registered. So IP Australia actually have a trademark register, and if you're thinking of a business name, it's always a good idea to go in and check that before you register your business name, because you don't want someone else sending you a letter going, oh, I already own Everyday VA as my business name and you registered it. You've got to change because you're in breach. So that's always a really thing, and it's free to do on IP Australia, the trademark search. And you might want to think about it if you're building a bigger brand, registering that to protect the brand and the usage of it. And that lasts for 10 years once it's done, and then it's a renewal there. So that's something to think about. But sometimes if you're just trading under if I was doing Emma Heuston VA, I wouldn't need, that's my name. No one's going to be doing that. But if I was trademarking Heuston, we have a problem. NASA probably wouldn't let me do that.
I don't think Tom Hanks would be overly happy about that.
Right. Spelling anyway. But that might be something that I would need to trademark and someone would have a problem with. So just got to keep that in mind. And sometimes, as your business grows or your brand grows, that might be something you want to do. Sometimes people go a bit trademark crazy. There is a fine line, I think, between what's advisable and what's maybe too much.
And it comes back to that thing that we spoke about before, right? Is that setting those foundations and starting out how you intend for that business to grow. And if you've got those empire dreams, then look at some of those things now, because all of that hard work and even paying for all your branding and all of that, for then someone to come back and say, hey, sorry, that name's already taken.
And
it's just the costs.
Go in and do a domain search and perhaps buy, like, instead of just the .com, buy the .com.au.au. And they're about $20 a year to hold. That's also a good thing to do, just to protect your brand, and something that's not a legal thing, but it's just that brand protection as part of the whole business.
Great points. And I love to, your messaging there around the financial expertise. I think it's something we talk again a lot about in the seed community, is get the experts. And every time I'm interviewed or someone asks me, like, what's that bit of advice? I'd be like, get the right people around you. The supportive people and the cheerleaders and the community, very important, but also the experts around legals and financials especially.
For sure. And I often see when I was a legal practice as well, with doing work for VAs, a lot would have company trusts, that their husband might have a big farm company, and that there is a family trust and a company, and the accountant set up this, but they don't really know why the accountant. If you don't know, just make sure you just ask and understand why that's being done and what benefit that is to you. Because there probably is a good reason, but if you don't know what that is, that financial literacy is really important.
So important, especially for women, I think.
Mm.
Especially for women. Yeah. Well, thank you, Emma, so much. If people want to check out your templates, they want to learn more about how you can support them, where is the best place for them to find you?
The best place would be readytobosslegal.com.
Mhm.
And also same name on Instagram and Facebook. We do a lot of, sort of educational posts each month, usually with a topic. This month, I think it's about OBMs actually.
Perfect.
But often next month, I think it's going to be AI. So it's, different sort of blogs come out of my mailing list and on the website. And I always try and structure some informational posts around that as well to get that information out there.
Yeah, well, we'll make sure all the links to those social media handles and your website are in the show notes. I think it is one of those topics where it's not a set and forget. It is fast paced, it's changing. Just look at what you were talking before about AI. So I think it is, go and follow Emma's pages and make sure you're educating yourself on those things that may be changing, impacting your business to ensure that, again, you and your clients are always protected because it does change. It is a changing landscape.
Absolutely. And that's, I suppose, an example. We've got an AI addendum you can add to your contract rather than starting from scratch. So, where we can do that rather than making you go, oh, you need a new contract now. That's not really fair. And that's not what we're about as a business. So if we can do a sort of a $20 addendum, then that's what we'll do instead of, making people buy something they already have 90% of. So.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, thank you again for your time. As always, I love chatting with you. I always learned so much. And thank you for always being such a huge supporter of our industry and especially the seed community.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Seed to Success. Make sure you are subscribing so you never miss an episode. If you know a VA or OBM who might benefit from this conversation, be sure to share it with them. And a big thank you to our episode sponsor, Ready to Boss Legal. Check out the episode description for a special discount on all their legal templates. Let's chat again soon.